I just want to start off by saying, if you want an answer at the end, prepare to be disappointed. There just isn't one. I was an intern at Nickelodeon Studios for a year in 2005 for my degree in animation. I wasn't paid, of course. Most internships aren't, but it did have some perks beyond education. To adults, it might not seem like a big one, but most kids at the time would go crazy for it. Now, since I worked directly with the editors and animators, I got to view the new episodes days before they aired. I'll get right into it without giving too many unnecessary details. They had very recently made the SpongeBob movie, and the entire staff was somewhat sapped of creativity. So it took them longer to start up the season, but the delay lasted for longer for more upsetting reasons. There was a problem with the season 4 premiere that set everyone and everything back for several months. Me and my two interns were in the editing room along with the lead animators and sound editors for the final cut. We received the copy that was supposed to be fair of a Creepypasta and gathered around the screen to watch. Now, given that it isn't final yet, animators often put up a mock title card, some sort of an inside joke for us, with phony, often times rude titles such as How Sex Doesn't Work instead of Rockabye Baby, when SpongeBob and Patrick adopt a sea scallop. Nothing particularly funny but work-related chuckles. So when we saw the title card, Squidward's Suicide, we didn't think it more than just a morbid joke. One of the interns did a small throw laugh at it. The happy-go-lucky music plays as normal. The story began with Squidward practicing his clarinet, hitting a few sour notes like normal. We're SpongeBob laughing outside, and Squidward stops yelling at him to keep it down as he has got a concert that night and he needs to practice. SpongeBob says okay and goes to see Sandy with Patrick. The bubble splash screen comes up and we see the ending of Squidward's concert. This is when things began to seem off. While playing, a few frames repeat themselves, but the sound doesn't. At this point, sound is psyched up with animation, so yes, that's not common. But when he stops playing, the sound finishes as if the skip never happened. There is slight murmuring in the crowd before they begin to boo him. Not normal cartoon booing that is common in the show, but you could very clearly hear the malice in it. Squidward's in full frame and looks visibly afraid. The shot goes to the crowd with SpongeBob in center frame, and he too is booing. Very much unlike him. That isn't the oddest thing though. What is odd is everyone had hyper-realistic eyes, very detailed. Clearly not shot of real people's eyes, but something a bit too real for CGI animation. The pupils were red. Some of us looked at each other obviously confused, but since we weren't the writers, we didn't question its appeal to children yet. The shot goes to Squidward sitting on the edge of his bed, looking very forlorn. The view of his porthole window is of a night sky, so it isn't very long after the concert. The unsettling part is that at this point there was no sound. Literally no sound, not even the feedback from the speakers in the room. It's as if the speakers were turned off, though their status showed them working perfectly well. He just sat there, blinking in the silence for about 30 seconds. Then he started to sob softly. He put his hands over his eyes and cried quietly for a full minute more. All the while our noise in the background very slowly growing from nothing to barely audible. It sounded like a slight breeze through a forest. The screen slowly began to zoom in on his face. By slow, I mean it It's only noticeable if you look at 10 shots seconds apart by side. His sobbing gets louder, more full of hurt and anger. The screen then twitches a bit, as if it twisted itself in itself for a split second, then back to normal. The wind through the trees sound gets slowly louder and more severe, as if a storm is brewing somewhere. The eerie part is that the sound and Squidward's sobbing sounded real, as if the sound wasn't coming from the speakers, but as if the speakers were holes in the sound was coming from. From the other side, as good a sound as the studio likes to have, they don't purchase the equipment to be that good to produce that sound of quality. Below the sound of the wind and sobbing, very faint, something sounded like laughing. It came at odd intervals and never lasted for more than a second. So you had a hard time pinning it. We watched this show twice, so pardon me if things sound too specific, but I've had time to think about them. After 30 seconds of this, the screen blurred and twitches violently, and something flashed on the screen as if it was a single frame was replaced. The read animators paused and rewound the frame by frame, and what we saw was horrible. It was a still photo of a dead child. It couldn't have been more than 6. The face was mangled and bloodied, one eye dangling over his upturned face, popped. He was naked down to his underwear, his stomach crudely cut open, and his intro was lying beside him. He was lying on some pavement that was probably a road. The most unsettling part was that there was a shadow of the photographer. There was no crime take, no evidence tags or markers, and the angle was completely off for a shot designed to be evidenced. It would seem that the photographer was the person responsible for the child's death. We were of course mortified, but pressed on, hoping it was some kind of sick joke. The screen flipped back to Squidward, still sobbing, rounder than ever, and half body in frame. There was now what appeared to be blood running down his face from his eyes. The blood was also done in hyper-realistic style, looking as if you touched it, you'll get blood in your fingers. The wind sounded now as if it were of a gale blowing through the forest. There were even snapping sounds of branches, the laughing a deep barty tone, lasting at longer intervals and coming more frequently. After every 20 seconds, the screen again twisted and showed a single frame photo. The editor was reluctant to go back. We all were, but he knew he had to. This time, the photo was that of appeared to be a little girl, no older than the first child. She was laying on her stomach, her barrettes in a pool of blood next to her. Her left eye was too popped out and popped, naked except for underpants. Her entrails were piled on the top of her, above another crude cut along her back. Again, the body was on the street as the photographer's shadow was visible, very similar in size and the shape to the first. I had to choke back vomit and one intern, the only female in the room, and ran out. The show resumed. About 5 seconds after this second photo played, Squidward went silent, as did all sound, like it was when this scene started. He put his tentacles down, and his eyes were now done in hyper-realism, like the others were in the beginning of the episode. They were bleeding, bloodshot, were pulsating. He stared at the screen as if watching the viewer. After about 10 seconds, he started sobbing, this time not covering his eyes. The sound was piercing and loud, and most fear, including of his sobbing was mixed with screams. Tears and blood were dripping down his face at a heavy rate. The wind sound came back again, so did the deep voiced laughter, and this time the still photo lasted for a good 5 frames. The animator was able to stop it on the 4th and backed up. This time the photo was of a boy about the same age, but this time the scene was different. The entrails were just being pulled out from her stomach wound like a large hand. The right eye popped and dangling, blood trickling down on it. The animator proceeded. It was hard to believe, but the next one was different, but we couldn't tell what. We went on to the next same thing, but he wants back to the first and prayed them quicker and lost it. I vomited on the floor, the animating and sound editors gasping at the screen. The 5 frames were not as if they were 5 different photos. They were played out as if they were frames from a video. We saw the hand slowly lift out the guts. We saw the kid's eyes focus on it. We even saw 2 frames of the kid starting to blink. The lead sound editor told us to stop. He had to call in the creator to see this. Mr. Hillenberg arrived within 15 minutes. He was confused as if why he was called down there. So the editors continued the episode. Once the few frames were shown, all screaming, all sound again stopped. Squidward was just staring at the viewer, full frame of the face. For about 3 seconds the shot quickly panned out and a deep voice said, "Do it." And we see in Squidward's hand a shotgun. He immediately puts the gun in his mouth and pulls the trigger. Realistic blood and brain matter splatters the wall behind him and his bed as he flies back with force. The last 5 seconds of this episode show his body right on the bed, on his side, one eye dangling on what's left of his head above the floor, starting blankly at it. Then the episode ends. Mr. Hillenberg was obviously angry at this. He demanded to know what the heck was going on. Most people left the room at this point, so it was just a handful of us to watch it again. Viewing the episode twice only served to imprint the eternity of it in my mind and caused me horrible nightmares. I'm sorry I stayed. The only theory we could think of was the file was edited by someone in this chain from the drawing studio to here. The CTO was called to internalize when it happened. The analysis of the file did show it wasn't edited over by new material. However, the timestamp of it was a mere 24 seconds before we began viewing it. All equipment involving was examined for foreign software and hardware, as well as glitches as if the timestamp may glitched, as shown and showed the wrong time, but everything checked out fine. We don't know what happened. To this day, nobody does. There was an investigation due to the nature of the photos, but nothing came of it. No child seemed to be identified, and no clues were gathered from the data involving nor physical clues in the photos. I never believed in unexplainable phenomena before, but now that I have something happen and can't prove anything about it beyond ancestral evidence, I think twice about